Ridsdale grew up in Ballarat in country Victoria. He'd been born into a strong Catholic family. He was one of 9 children. His uncle, Gerald Ridsdale, was a priest.
When I grew up, he was always like the shining light, and certainly for my grandmother, he was the pinnacle of her Catholic achievement, I guess. He started to hang around more when I reached around the age of 11. He started to turn up, and my mum was pregnant with my youngest sister, and he started to offer to assist by looking after me for weekends or taking me away.
Father Gerald was hanging around because he was a pedophile. Father Gerald began assaulting David when David was 11, and the abuse lasted till he was 15.
What forms did the assaults take? They were always masturbation of you?
No. Initially it was masturbation, and it was kissing, and then oral sex, both. And I remember the first time we were in the bush somewhere, and he tried to make me perform oral sex, and I remember I was gagging and stuff, and he would get angry if I couldn't perform the way he wanted, and he took me for driving lessons. That was did you want to learn to drive? Let me drive a car in a paddock, and sure, any 11-year-old will tell you that's a pretty exciting thing.
Sick as it may sound, the abuse would sometimes occur when priest was driving altar boy to the next town to say mass.
Both as a man as a priest, he knew it was wrong.
And what would be his demeanour?
At the time, a total blank. It was, it was no words, no anything. It was an action, and then it would finish, and he would just drive on as if nothing had happened. And then we'd...
Do you mean that he'd then start the car?
He'd start the car and go straight to the church and say mass. And
it's hard to imagine.
Well, it's hard to forget.
He was probably the most notorious pedophile. He was shifted from parish to parish. Whenever the church authorities were told of what he was up to, they seemed to just ignore it and send him on his merry way to another parish and not warn the parishioners.
David Forster is a Melbourne lawyer who has represented nearly 100 victims of sexual abuse. He says Gerald Ridsdale had been abusing children for 15 years prior to latching on to David.
Isn't someone culpable in circumstances like that? Someone's got to take responsibility for that sort of thing.
Well, you'd hope that someone would take responsibility, but the fact is there is a complete lack of accountability for this the disastrous way the church has treated victims of sexual abuse.
Another young priest who figured in David's childhood was George Pell. Pell is now Archbishop in Sydney. This is where you'd see Pell quite a bit?
Often, yeah, he would swim laps here, and he was a big man, and kids would come and he was the man mountain you'd jump on and he'd throw you off. And he would have known my parents since before I was born.
So it was a family relationship?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't come round to the family or anything, but you'd see him at functions. I mean, I'd see him in the pool. I saw him quite a lot, and I've called him George from when I was a kid. I've never called him father. I never have. It's never...
Father George?
No, never. No, he's George to me. He always was.
And he knew you, David?
Oh, yeah, he knew I was, yeah, definitely. Would greet me by name.
Pell also knew well Uncle Gerald, David's abuser. They'd been to school together, seminary together, and as young priests, they'd shared a house. In the early 90s, David summoned the courage to tell the now Bishop George Pell what Father Ridsdale had done to him.
He was one of the few individuals that I'd trusted as a young man, that I could think back on all the people I knew in the Catholic Church, and he's one of the few individuals that I thought I had a good rapport with, and a trust relationship and a friendship. I knew he was the bishop in the area because through my work, and suddenly realised that he was in a position of power within the church, and I honestly thought I would find a way to deal with my own emotional problems without having to tell the world what had happened. And my big fear, the reason I hadn't gone earlier, was actually my grandparents, especially my grandmother, who, I loved to bits, and I was terrified that if she found out, it would kill her.
This is your grandmother, who is the
Gerald's-
mother of
Gerald, yeah.
Father Gerald Gridstone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was terrified, and so eventually I chose a course of action.
Okay. Now, you called Bishop Pell
Yeah.
out of the blue.
Yeah.
Tell me why, please.
I was getting so confused and so psychologically agitated and depressed and angry. I had to deal with this issue. I believed at the time that he was the best way for me to go, look, what help do you have? I think my terms were, what internal processes do the church have to help with situations like this, because I'm beside myself and I'm terrified.
Now, to the best of your memory, tell me what happened, please. You dialed up a number and then what?
I dialed number, asked to speak to him. I said, hello, George, because that's what I called him. And he said, hi, how are you? I said, look, this assault has happened to me. I'm really beside myself. I need some assistance, some help. His reaction was so totally unexpected. He didn't respond to anything I said. He sort of cut me off and was using all sorts of language and quite confusing.
Now, did you tell him specifically?
I told him specifically I'd been assaulted by my uncle, Gerald Ridsdale. Very specifically.
Okay. And what did he say?
He took control of the conversation, and I could sense anger. At that point, I can categorically say I don't remember everything he said, because it was overwhelming. It was very confusing, and I started to get a sense he was insinuating things, and I felt like I'd done something wrong.
That you'd done something wrong?
Yeah, that I was at fault, and that I was causing him grief. And then all of a sudden, I just stopped and went, George, I'm totally lost. Can you please tell me what you were trying to say here? And his response to that was, I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet.
Now, are there any doubts in your mind that those were the specific words that he used?
I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet. None at all. Not those last two phrases, no. Because it
10
triggered...
years after the event, how can you be so sure?
Because of what it triggered in me. It changed everything. All of a sudden, the priorities got into place. My fear of my grandma had to be put aside. Despite the fact that this day I still believe that by becoming open with it, it actually did kill her. She became very ill not long after it came out and was soon bedridden and died.
Do you realise the gravity of what you're saying? I mean, 10 years after the event, you're saying that the man that's now the Archbishop of Sydney, effectively the head of the Catholic Church in Australia, 10 years ago, was offering to shut you up about child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
You can't make a much more grave charge than that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, that is definitely what happened. That was because that one phone conversation is the reason that I then went to the police and so on, and everything that happened afterwards.
To continue with the phone conversation, you then put the direct question, what are you trying to say, or words to that effect?
Yeah.
And what was the response?
It was very definite. I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet.
And you then said what?
You probably have to beep it, but I said, fuck you and fuck everything you stand for. And I hung up. And any minuscule faith I might have had in the church and its people was exploded.
David says he then rang his elder sister, Bernie.
David rang me I think it was afternoon, and was very distraught when he rang and said that he had made a phone call to George Pell and asked him for his advice relating to sexual abuse by my uncle that David had suffered as a child, and that the outcome of the conversation was that George had asked him what it would take for it to go away, to make it go away.
How long after the conversation between David and Pell did David call you?
The same day.
David told me he also reported the conversation to a second sister, Trish.
David told me that after he had told George about the abuse, George asked him what it would take to keep him silent. In fact, David's words to me were, "The bastard tried to offer me a bribe."
That same day, David says he rang the police.
I told them I wanted to press charges against my uncle.
Did you tell them about the conversation with Pell?
I can't really remember. I was actually in tears talking to them, and it was when I mentioned my uncle's name that everything changed all of a sudden.
Unbeknownst to David, at that same time, Victorian police were already investigating Father Gerald Ridsdale. The day after David made his statement, Ridsdale was charged over the sexual assault of David and a number of other boys. When he appeared in court in May 1993, George Pell was by his side. Ridsdale eventually did 3 months.
Tell me the time frame. At that stage, had your conversation with Pell taken place?
Oh, yeah, months before.
So at the time he's walking into the court,
He was fully aware of what I'd said to him.
he was fully aware of what the man alongside him had done to you, or anyway, your
Well,
account.
what I'd told him, yeah, absolutely. Fully aware.
Not that long after these events, Father Ridsdale faced even more serious charges and was eventually sentenced to a minimum of 15 years. Stephen Woods was another victim of Ridsdale and 2 Christian Brother teachers.
Well, I was first abused by Brother Best. He was the principal of St. Olympia's Primary School. And then the next year I went to St. Pat's College, and where I was abused by Brother Dowland. I went to the cathedral one day, to the presbytery, and looking for a priest to talk to after 2 years of being molested. And the priest who answered the door said, "Oh yes, there's a Father Ridsdale here." So I knew him from long connections ago, and lo and behold, within a short while I was being raped by him.
When you say short while, what do you mean?
Well, within the hour,
Within the hour.
yes.
Now, the other 2 Christian brothers who molested you, what is their connection to Pell, as you understand it?
Well, Pell was the Vicar General looking after religious education in Ballarat, and as Dowland was moved to St. Pat's College here, straight after molesting a boy in Melbourne, Pell should have known. He damn well should have known. I mean, how incompetent do you have to be? That's his responsibility. He should have known what was going on in his school that he was supposed to be in charge of.
It's a matter of regret that the Catholic Church has taken some time to come to grips with this sexual assault issue adequately.
As Archbishop of Melbourne in 1996, Pell established a diocesan commission into sexual abuse.
I would like to make a sincere, unreserved and public apology.
Pell's process, as it is known, was designed to keep cases out of court. Compensation payouts were capped at $50,000.
It would appear to be a maximum based on protection of the church rather than protection of the victim. I feel as though we've been told to take the $50,000 and shut up. It feels like the same thing.
These parents, whom we'll call Gary and Elizabeth, have asked us not to identify them or their daughters. Over a 6-year period, 2 of their 3 girls were sexually abused by their local priest, Father Kevin O'Donnell. The abuse began in 1987, but church officials received their first complaint about O'Donnell as far back as 1958. At the time of their daughter's abuse, the auxiliary bishop was George Pell.
It's his duty to know, isn't it?
He was a very senior part of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. He was the bishop for the area in which we reside. He should have known.
The 2 girls were each 5 years old when the abuse started. In the years since, the eldest has attempted suicide several times. The very night before our interview with her parents, she attempted an overdose. Her sister, according to the parents, started drinking to numb the pain, wandered in front of a car, and is now confined to a wheelchair.
Is there any doubt in your mind that there's a direct connection between the abuse your daughters suffered and their present state?
Absolutely not. It's a direct connection. There's no doubt.
Gary and Elizabeth applied for compensation through the commission established by Pell. For the eldest daughter, they were offered $50,000. In this letter from George Pell's lawyers, they were told the compensation offered provided a realistic alternative to litigation that will otherwise be strenuously defended.
$50,000 for a destroyed daughter's life.
Absolutely.
Was that reasonable?
I don't believe so.
So their position was that no matter what had been done to your daughter, $50,000 was the ceiling.
That's right, even if she'd been abused by 10 priests.
Have you signed on the bottom line?
Our daughter hasn't, no.
Father Kevin O'Donnell died in 1997, shortly after being released from jail. In February of that year, Archbishop Pell travelled to the Melbourne parish where O'Donnell had abused children for 17 years. Pell granted Gary and Elizabeth an audience.
Well, we'd gone into that meeting, I think, hoping to get some answers as to how the church felt about it, how Pell felt about it, and really looking for an expression of great sorrow and an open arms of what can we do to help you. Instead, we were confronted with a legalistic approach from someone just trying to manage the problem, trying to maybe dispose of us in a short 15-minute meeting, and that would be it. We came away from the meeting after discussions with him feeling empty and angry. There was nothing came out of that meeting that made us feel as though the church or the hierarchy was really helping us or other people to come to terms with what had happened and to get through that whole process of recovery. It was just an awful feeling.
Came out feeling worse than when we went in.
We showed Pell a photo of him presenting our daughter with a confirmation certificate at her confirmation. His response was, "That's a very nice photo, that's lovely," as if to say that's how we want the children coming out of the church. We then showed him a photo of our daughter just after she had cut her wrists with blood coming out of them. And his only comment, with absolutely no change in attitude and facial expression, was, "Oh, she's changed, hasn't she?" And that was it. That was it. I was nearly crying. My wife was nearly crying. He sat there with a stony face. "Oh, she's changed." And she's certainly changed. There's no doubt he was right. And she changed because of the actions of a priest years before, the actions of a priest whose actions had been known previously in other parishes and he'd been moved on.
People are too afraid. They don't have the courage, and I want to see people have courage. And people like George Pell are in the position to change that. And you know, what he did to me was wrong. Simple as that. He reacted like someone who was in damage control land already. I don't know what was going on before I rang, but he was in damage control the minute I rang. He knows. And I would sit and look him in the eye right now and say, "I dare you to lie to my face. I dare you."
So why should we believe you?
George Pell knows the truth.
Here now is Dr. Pell's response.
Archbishop, how widespread, if at all, would you consider sexual abuse by Catholic clergy to be here in Australia now?
I think we have brought to light most of it. For the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a system of protocols in place which I believe is substantially working. There's much too much of it. I've apologised, and I repeat my apology to the victims, but we're dealing with it.
You seem to be conceding, though, that it is still going on.
Well, human nature doesn't change. I hope that there's not too much of it going on.
So you concede that some is probably going on?
I don't really know. Anything that's brought to my attention, I will see that it's dealt with according to the protocols.
There shouldn't be any.
There shouldn't be any, certainly
Now,
not.
if it was going on now, would you necessarily know about it?
Not necessarily, no.
Now, is it homosexual sex or heterosexual sex amongst the clergy that's the bigger problem?
Most paedophilia involves young girls. With the Catholic clergy, more of it involves younger men after puberty.
Can you put a number, out of the air, on the number of Catholic clergy who have been convicted of these sort of crimes, say, over the last 10 years?
No, I can't. I can give you Melbourne figures, though. During my time in Melbourne, we paid compensation to 100 victims, and 15 or 20 priests were stood down.
Do you know this Broken Rights group?
I do.
They've put out a list here of 99 convictions, not all priests, some brothers, but Catholic employees, I suppose, to use the broad sweep. 99 in 10 years. It's about one a month.
That's probably right. It's a sad and terrible thing. It's probably right. I'm not sure, but it's probably of that order.
Still today, one a month?
No, certainly not. I don't think. I'm hoping that the worst is behind us.
Now, when you were Episcopal Vicar for Education in Ballarat, that's effectively the boss of the Catholic teachers?
Titular. The bishop's representative in the area.
Well, buck stops with you.
No, not really. The buck stops with either the bishop or the director of education. I chaired the education board. Very much a part-time job. So I was involved, certainly.
Yeah, 'cause I want to know how much responsibility you take personally for those teachers under you in those 10 years that you were there who abused their charges.
I wouldn't take any direct responsibility at all, because I was not aware of any accusations that I didn't deal with.
No, but wasn't it your job to know what was going on?
Well, no, because I wasn't the executive running education.
As Bishop, isn't that ducking the responsibility?
No, it's a description of what in fact happened.
Yeah, but what should have happened is really what I'm trying to get to.
Well, what should have happened is another problem. I don't apologise for any of the... I do apologise. I don't want to pretend that those things were always handled well, but it wasn't my bag. I was responsible for one area of church life, and I fulfilled my responsibilities. I didn't, in the areas where I didn't have responsibilities, I wasn't obliged to act.
Well, tell me, you know Father Gerald Ridsdale?
I certainly do.
Did you go to school with him?
He was years ahead of me.
At the same school?
But we were at the same school. I knew him as a seminarian. Knew of him as a seminarian, knew him as a priest, and for 12 months only, I was in the same house as him.
You shared a house with him?
With, there were 4 priests there.
So you got to know him pretty well in that time?
Moderately.
Now, I presume you didn't know at that time that he was a heinous pedophile?
I had no idea at all. Never entered my head.
How could you not know? After going to school with him, going to seminary with him, growing up with him, living with him?
Nobody around there knew that. Nobody even hinted it to me. Had no idea. He survived in that role for years and years. He's a clever fella. And he did some dreadful, evil things.
But how could you not know?
I certainly didn't. And none of the priests around me knew either.
Did you know David Ridsdale, Father Gerald Ridsdale's nephew?
Yes, I know the Ridsdales, yes.
Did David Ridsdale tell you that his uncle, Gerald, Father Gerald, had been abusing him?
Never. Never.
Never?
At any stage.
So he says he did?
Well, that's completely false.
Didn't happen?
Didn't happen.
He says that in January 93, he rang you and told you.
Oh, well, that's 93. I thought you were talking about back in the 70s. Ridsdale would have been in jail by then, I think.
He went to jail in 93, sir.
Yeah. I've spoken with David off and on over the years. I've got on fairly well with him.
Right. David says that he called you in January 93 and told you about it.
Well, that's probably true, but I was well aware of Ridsdale's crimes in general by 93.
And that when he rang you in January 93, you offered him a bribe to shut up.
I certainly offered nothing of the sort.
Could I play you the tapes of his accusations?
Yeah, for sure.
Please.
Then all of a sudden, I just stopped and went, George, I'm totally lost. Can you please tell me what you were trying to say here? And his response to that was, I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet.
Now, are there any doubts in your mind that those were the specific words that he used?
I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet. None at all.
And you then said what?
You probably have to beep it, but I said, fuck you and fuck everything you stand for. And I hung up.
Now, Archbishop, those words there are terrible. Did you use those words, I want to know what it would take to keep you quiet?
No, I didn't. I've got a recollection that I spoke to David a number of times, that he phoned me a number of times on this incident. I think by that stage Ridsdale was in jail.
No.
He wasn't in jail in 93?
No, he was in jail later in 93. We can date this, you see, because you have the police statement
Yes,
that David Ridsdale gave,
Yes.
which is purportedly on the same day that he spoke to you on the phone.
Well, I can't ever remember him swearing at me.
We'll leave aside the swearing, so the really important words are, you said, so it is alleged, I want to know what it would take to keep you quiet.
No, I certainly would never have said that, and I didn't say that. I could quite imagine saying to him what sort of help might we be able to offer him in terms of... I'm enormously sympathetic to his plight, and in 93 as an auxiliary bishop, in Melbourne, I had no capacity to offer him anything anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly, now I'm quite prepared to concede that I would have been rattled, that I was distressed. I have great sympathy towards him and his family, and what happened to him was dreadful, but his recollection is some of the things he said is totally wrong.
It would be very serious if you had said that.
Yeah, I certainly would.
A resigning matter?
I don't know about resigning, but certainly be serious and a grave error.
Okay. I'd like you to play you now, sir, a tape of David Ridsdale's two sisters who have been interviewed for this program.
David told me that after he had told George about the abuse, George asked him what it would take to keep him silent. In fact, David's words to me were, the bastard tried to offer me a bribe.
So having heard the sisters, sir, do you have anything you'd like to add?
They were misinformed. Right. But it's a very distressing sort of situation for David and both for myself at the time.
Yes.
I have a recollection that he spoke to me more than once, and I think I phoned subsequently at least once to his house and spoke to his wife to see how things were going. I spoke with him a number of times, and I deeply regret that he misunderstood things in these ways. And before today, I'd never heard a suggestion that he'd put that interpretation on it. He'd never said that to me.
Do you know of the family in Victoria, Melbourne? Two daughters?
I met once with the parents.
Their daughters were abused by Father Kevin O'Donnell from 87 to 92. Mm-hmm. And the families of the opinion that if you'd done your job, their daughters would not have been abused.
Oh, well, that's completely mistaken.
Would you like to see what they've said?
Yes,
please.
We showed Pell a photo of him presenting our daughter with a confirmation certificate at her confirmation. His response was, "That's a very nice photo." We then showed him a photo of our daughter just after she had cut her wrists with blood coming out of them. And his only comment, with absolutely no change in attitude, in facial expression, was, oh, she's changed, hasn't she?
They're not a very happy family, are they, Archbishop?
No, they've suffered a lot.
Here, those photos he was talking about.
Yeah,
You've probably seen.
Which is the...
That's the one I think of you confirming the most.
Yes.
And the other one is later.
I've never seen the photo
With the slashed wrist.
With the slashed wrist.
Mother and father say they gave it to you.
Well, I don't believe I've seen. I've got no recollection of that. I mean, it's an awful. No, I don't believe I ever saw that.
And you offered them $50,000
I
to shut up.
I offered them nothing.
Huh?
They were free to go into a process which is run by an independent panel.
They got the letter here.
That's from the lawyers after they'd been through the process, which they were free to enter.
You're exactly right. It's from the lawyers. Cause Chambers Westgarth.
That's right.
Dear Mr. and Mrs., I won't mention the family name. As you know, we act for Archbishop Pell.
Yeah.
You offered them 50 grand to be quiet.
I offered them 50 grand in compensation, according to the publicly acknowledged procedures.
And to be quiet.
And they chose not to accept that.
If words have meaning, so you bought their silence, or you sought to buy their silence, a realistic alternative to litigation that will otherwise be strenuously defended.
If they want to go to law, we will use the law to defend ourselves.
And you swear them to secrecy.
Well, we ask them to keep.
You swear them, don't ask them, you swear them.
There is a requirement that they don't talk about it, and most of them are happy not to. And if they don't want to use that, they can do something else.
They can go to the courts.
Yes.
Why do you impose this condition, sir?
Because many of them don't want to be subjected to publicity, and of course it's shameful for the church.
Archbishop, thank you.
Good. Thank you.